Well, good morning, White Rock. Welcome this morning. We are having a couple glitches here. We had a power outage this morning, which is like our worst nightmare ever because we are all online, and with no power, it doesn't happen. So sorry for a few glitches here and there. We're going to keep our fingers crossed that we have no more power outages. But you're here with the Sunday Sit Down. We do this every Sunday morning as an opportunity to gather before we start worship and have a little bit more of an in-depth conversation about whatever it is that we're talking about in worship. So we are in our series, Faithful Friction. This is week 2 of Faithful Friction. Which is not really easy to say very quickly over and over again, so I'm not going to repeat it one more time. But last week we talked about listen well, and this week the idea really is forgive well. And so I'm thrilled once again to have my friend and colleague Lisa Hancock with me. Lisa, thanks so much for joining us today. We are so grateful that you came back. we didn't scare you off. I mean, I'm not really surprised, but we didn't scare you off, so we're really glad.
Not at all.
Really glad that you came back and have joined us. So last week we talked a lot about listening.
Right.
And I had a lot of people reach out to me and just say, what she said about listening just hit it right on the head of what I feel about this idea of respect and being the highest form of respect. And this week we're going to shift a little bit and look at this idea of forgiveness. Right?
I know. I know. It's a big one.
It is a big one. And I would love to just start by having you share, like, what does forgiveness really mean? And whose role is it to forgive? And I mean, there's so many questions about forgiveness.
Right.
But when you hear forgiveness as somebody who's an expert in conflict, what do you think of, or where does it take you first and foremost?
Well, I want to say that as a mediator, I'm a neutral. And so I'm kind of a midwife. I help people work through, create safe spaces to have conversations. If there's forgiveness, that is sort of, it's an epiphany. It's nirvana. It's heaven for me. It's something that two people have to work out on their own.
Yeah.
And so many times there's just not safe spaces for people to be able to talk about things. So many times, forgiveness is right around the corner, but we just don't know how to get there.
Yeah.
So I want to start with saying this, that I think personally, based off of my experience and what I've gone through, forgiveness is an individual choice. It's something that happens internally, whereas reconciliation is more of a external sign of the interior act of forgiveness.
Okay, so that's a really good delineation. I think often, and I think I told you this last week too, after we finished recording, that so often those almost get lumped together, this idea of forgiveness and reconciliation.
Oh, they do. Because I will say that for me, reconciliation restores the relationship. So it takes two people to do that. Yeah. Forgiveness is very individual. Okay. And forgiveness doesn't always lead to reconciliation. Those are really two separate acts. So it does take two people to reconcile. It does take two people to forgive to reconcile. So it is separate journeys that sort of meet in the middle at the end. Yeah. And reconciliation restores, and sometimes you can't get there. Sometimes forgiveness is about as good as you can get. So I told you I might tell this story, and I kind of can't believe I'm going to do it, but I am, because it involves old neighbors.
Okay.
And I like to think I'm a good person, and so I want to forgive. I feel like forgiveness is kind of like drinking or getting a vaccination against an illness. When you don't forgive, you carry this heavy weight around, and it's really awful, because I think all of us have had conflict with people, and it's taken a while to forgive, or perhaps we don't forgive. But if we do, it's really a gift that I think we give ourselves.
Sure.
So I had this really big birthday last summer, and my sweet husband, put together a party and invited some former neighbors of ours from a suburb outside of Dallas. And when they showed up at the party, it was quite obvious that something had been going on before they got to the party. And they brought that problem into the space of the party and really just ruined the last part of my birthday. It was very public. It was awful. And they left, and they called the next day, and they apologized. And at that point, of course I'm going to forgive them. It's, but it was a really big deal to me, this party.
Sure.
And I mean, when I say they ruined the party, it was epic. Fill in the blanks. What I decided, but it took me a year to discern, a year of turning down their invitations to get back together, was that I forgive them. I don't want them in my life anymore. Because when I look back, I think I was fooling myself, because the handwriting was on the wall, that there had been lots of things like that, little glimpses of this behavior that I had seen while living next door to him.
Yeah.
And I had just chosen to ignore it. And so I absolutely want what's best for them, both of them.
Sure.
And I forgive, their behavior. And I've chosen not to continue to get back together with them. So the relationship's not restored, and I feel okay with that.
Yeah.
I do think that I think that as Christians, we are called to forgive. But I do think that there are some things that can be unforgivable.
Yeah. Unforgivable. So you even said that there wasn't the reconciliation for the relationship,
Right.
which is an okay thing.
Right.
But there are some things also that are unforgivable.
Yes, and I still think we're called to forgive.
Okay.
I do.
Okay. I'm curious. What are the things? Do you have specific instances or
Well,
examples?
I am I'm a defense-initiated victim outreach specialist for capital murder cases. So I walk hand in hand with the victims' families.
Wow.
And these people, most of these really good people that I walk this really difficult journey with, have chosen to forgive the person that killed their loved one.
Yeah.
The ones that don't carry this huge burden for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And it keeps them from living a full life, for sure. But there are, it's tough stuff.
Yeah, and it's really helpful for me to recognize that forgiveness really is our own thing. It's our own healing process. Where we think so often that forgiveness is for the other person, but really, and it probably is that too, right?
It is.
Don't miss that part of it too. But really, I like what you said about it being an internal thing, and there's really a forgiveness process that comes about. Let's stay on that a little bit though. This idea of things that may be unforgivable, or maybe people who aren't there yet.
Yes.
And scenarios and situations, right? And this is definitely the nth degree, right? But you think about people who find themselves in oppressive situations or abusive situations, or and you can look at it like an individual aspect of a relationship or systemic issues as well. And sometimes I think things like Christianity, right? Like religion and faith has been said, well, we're supposed to forgive, so you need to forgive. And often we lump in forget then too, right? Which then puts us right back in the scenario of continuing the abuse.
Right.
So talk us through what that looks like in the midst of conflict.
So where I feel my very first pushback as you're talking is that we use words like need and should when we're talking about forgiveness, or when we're talking about how we want somebody to do something, or if you were Christian, you would do that, you should do that, you need to do that. And I think that this journey to forgiveness is so personal, and I think that it just depends on your background and your social support and where you are, like life experiences, how much you need, how quickly it will take you, perhaps, to work through the forgiveness piece. I do think that if you decide not to, I think it really is like swallowing poison, because I think it is so much we just carry such that large burden.
Yeah.
And then there's that piece of you're Christian, you should forgive and forget. And you're right, that piece, that forget, restorative justice tells us that we don't forget, that we need certain things to restore the relationship, and that it is sometimes it's not my responsibility to provide that. Sometimes it's the other person's responsibility. So it's complicated.
And I keep thinking, like, what is the end goal here? The subtitle of this is finding peace in the midst of conflict or in conflict. And I think that, I don't know if peace is the end goal with all of this. Whenever you do work with conflict, is reconciliation the end goal? Is like kind of inner peace the end goal? What are you hoping for? Or is it just so unique to each situation?
Well, I can tell you that as a mediator, I'm not supposed to have an end goal.
Okay.
All I do.
Here I am, driven by this capitalistic society, right? We got to have a goal in mind here, right?
No. I have this hope, this flame of hope, that I can create a safe enough space for people to talk about what they need in order so that they can find their own way towards forgiveness and reconciliation. I think if we feel like we are being expected, or expectation is just resentment waiting to happen.
Yeah.
So if we have this expectation of you should be doing this because you're supposed to be a Christian, I feel pushback on that. It makes me want to question that, personally.
Sure.
My end goal is to be able to just have people hear each other and hope that they can find their own way toward what forgiveness is for them or reconciliation is for them. It can look so different for everybody. Yeah. But you know what? We don't want it to look different. I mean, I don't want it. I want nice little pat answers.
Yeah.
I want everybody to join hands and sing Kumbaya at the end of the night. Right. Personally, I do. And I know that if it's about me, then you don't get your needs met. And then perhaps, I'm just, putting my agenda over on yours.
Sure. Yeah, and, you said one of them being just to hear each other.
Yeah.
And I think what we're seeing so much in the world now is people talking past each other or just throwing things at each other.
Yeah.
It makes me think of this idea of cancel culture, that like, well, if one person says the wrong thing, then they're going to get blown up on Twitter or whatever,
Yes.
like literally canceled, like, oh, you're done. And
like you don't get a second chance. It's like,
yeah, there's no second chance. There's no opportunity. And the ironic thing, I was doing a little reading on cancel culture before this. The ironic thing, what it ends up doing is actually, like if it's a celebrity who gets canceled, usually it actually ends up elevating them. Like they end up selling more books, their article gets read more, their music gets listened to more, because people who are on the opposite end of the spectrum are actually now really intrigued by that.
Yes.
Why you canceled them, now it's intrigued somebody else.
Right.
And so again, we're talking past each other and throwing these ideas beyond one another, but there's not actually any kind of conversation that takes place.
Right.
And so it's hard to find this balance between, I understand the need for someone to feel like somebody needs to be canceled because they're doing harm to somebody.
Yes.
And like I think that's a legit and probably necessary feeling they have. But then where do we find common ground then to actually have conversations?
So you brought up some great points, and I want to say this, that the fact that it takes time to set up just to set up a conversation,
Right.
to set up a time to sit down and talk, most people aren't willing to give it that. Many people, I can't say most, that's not fair.
Sure.
It seems that we're in such a hurry today to get through a conversation and get to the end, that this caring enough to confront in a way that is loving or kind takes time. There's steps that have to go. You have to go through it. You've got to plan. You've got to ask permission. You've got to be confrontable. And that's another thing, is that it's so easy to cancel something out. But if you do that, then you won't have your turn for somebody else to perhaps confront you.
Yeah. What was it? It was caring enough to confront.
Caring enough to confront.
Yeah.
And it's scary and it's hard.
And I'm assuming, again, everything's different and individualized, and there are some people who now is not the time to do that,
Yeah.
right? Like they need more time, they need more space.
Right.
Because they may care to confront, but the confronting may not lead to anything productive.
Well, and we call that ripeness of conflict, and sometimes it's overripe. Like sometimes the atmosphere is so charged and just with explosive
Yeah.
that sometimes we need that opportunity for things to just sort of settle a bit, you know.
Let the powder keg settle down a little bit before.
Yes.
Well, and this leads us, our little teaser for next week, right? Next week we're going to talk a lot more about boundaries. And I think that this will be something really important as we lead our way into the holidays, whatever that may look like for us, whether that ends up just being via Zoom or a FaceTime call or whatever,
Right.
or if you decide to have a holiday, or even the conversations around the holidays, right? This may be the powder keg that people are sitting on.
Right.
And I think boundaries is a really important conversation to have to really personalize this to help people equip themselves better to figure out how to do this, whatever their scenario is.
I'm going through it right now. So
Well,
it'll be,
me too.
this will be interesting. Boundaries are, yeah. And boundaries in the midst of everything that's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I know,
Everybody take a
right?
deep breath.
Deep collective breath.
Yeah.
Just talking about this kind of gets my heart rate up a little bit.
Well, I was just paying attention to my body, and I just kept squirming. Like, I was just aware that my body's, squirming even just
it's
talking
hard
about it.
stuff, Phil.
I'm a 9. I'm a peacemaker, right? Like, conflict freaks me out. My palms are sweating. It's fine. Everything's fine. Okay. Thank you
You're
for being
welcome.
here. We're gonna wrap this up. We're gonna put a pretty bow on conflict next week, right?
Yes, we are.
Does that ever really happen?
Yeah, let's talk about forgiveness and we will reconcile this conversation next
Boom.
week.
There we go. Okay. Y'all, thanks so much for joining us for the Sunday Sit Down. We're going to start worship in just a couple minutes. Lisa, once again, thanks for being with us
Thank you,
today.
Phil.
And for all of you who are engaging in the hard work of conflict, thank you. If you want to reach out between now and next Sunday, let us know what questions you have about anything we've been talking about or knowing that we're going to talk about boundaries. You can personal message me on any social media platforms or you can email me at the church too. And we'd love to bring up your questions next week when we wrap this up. So grab your coffee. We'll be back in a couple minutes for worship. Thanks for joining us.